On today's Locked On Bucks, we continue to get ready for this first round series with the Indiana Pacers. We now know the days of all 7 games if we need them and times of the first 4. We'll take a look at that schedule, what it could potentially mean for Giannis, and whether or not this series will feature the NBA's 6th man of the year. We get into that conversation coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and for all the everydayers as well that are joining us on the YouTube stream. Your team every day. You can, of course, find Camille on the Pack-A-Day podcast and the Technical Foul podcast when she's not here on Locked On Bucks. You can find me on the Bucks Radio Network. And Camille, it was about midnight last night, this morning, that we learned the schedule for this first round series. So I suppose we should start with that. We knew it was going to be Sunday, had an inkling that it was either going to be that first game of the day or the first nighttime window, and it is a 6 o'clock tip Sunday night for game 1 between the Bucks and the Pacers, which I suppose I'm going to mention this and then duck for anybody that is already dreading things and comparing to last year. I believe that was the exact same day and time that the Bucks started their series with the Miami Heat in the first round a season ago. But I think the big thing is when we saw these game days announced, I think most Bucks fans were probably looking back at, okay, what day was that Celtics game? And then kind of doing the math and looking ahead to, okay, what would this mean for Giannis? So what we do know is game 2 is going to be Tuesday night. You wondered if there would be just 1 or 2 days off in between those games. But Tuesday will be 2 weeks to the day that Giannis suffered that soleus/calf strain. And if you were looking for the 3-week window, I believe that lines up with game 5. So, look, I don't think any of us have any real clarity yet. We kind of talked about that earlier in the week too. I don't expect that clarity to come through the end of this week. I think we will still very much be in the dark. We've seen that reporting from Shams and other sources too, implying it's doubtful that Giannis is going to play in game 1. I don't think that's a surprise. But in terms of the rest of it, I don't know how much clarity we're going to continue to get here until you just see the injury report where Giannis is going to be listed as questionable and we hear from Doc Rivers, yeah, it's a game time decision. Or maybe we hear, yeah, we expect him to play. I think that's about as clear as it's going to get up until he actually steps foot on the court.
Same here. It doesn't make sense either for if the Bucks were to show their hand early, like, hey, this is what we're planning to do. Like, there's normally a little bit of level of gamesmanship as well that goes on. Like the Clippers with the Kawhi thing, like, is he flying? Like, yeah, he's ramping up, but like, so like, you just don't know a little bit as well during this time frame. So I'm with you. I don't think we're going to know until we get close to the game time, till the injury report comes out and you see what he's listed at. And even yet and still, it could be something day of the game. It changes. But I love the approach that Chris Middleton mentioned yesterday, where it's like, if he's not playing, we're approaching it like we're not going to have him. And I think that's the best way for fans to also go into this game, of just assume you don't have him. Assume that you don't, and that this is going to take some time, because worst case scenario, if you're assuming that he's not playing and then it turns out he is playing, then that's just a boost, because we know how the Pacers have historically matched up with Giannis throughout the season, and how big of a boom it is to have him on the court with the team. So I think it's just better right now to just assume he's not going to be playing come game 1, with the hope that he can return at some point during the series. And with the series schedule being out now, I know I saw some people like, dang, I wish we could have gotten that Boston schedule where it's a couple of days off in between games. Like Boston plays Sunday, Wednesday, Saturday. And it's like, if we could just have a couple of extra days off, that could do us some good. But to have it 2 weeks to the day for game 2 in this series, and then 3 weeks out for game 5, that puts you in line of where they initially said that Giannis might be returning back from that injury. So something to keep an eye on. But like I said, I think it's safe to assume that or best to assume that he's not going to start off this series.
Well, and I don't think the league would ever admit to this, but I think a big part of that that Boston schedule is, we talked about it on the post game that we did Sunday after the regular season finale, that the New York Knicks were a 2 seed at 50 wins, the fewest win total for a 2 seed in nearly 20 years, and the Celtics almost lapped the field. And I think part of that with that schedule too is we maybe anticipate this Celtics series wrapping up very early. So let's stretch this out so it's not Boston getting a prolonged absence or time off between their second round series potentially starting there. Again, I think the caution with that is we just came off talking about Giannis's injury and what his availability is I think all eyes are going to be peeled to the TVs tonight, because Joel Embiid is listed as questionable for that matchup with the Miami Heat. And if that happens and you see the dreaded Philadelphia 76ers and the Boston Celtics in the first round, not to get too off track, Camille, but we've kind of joked about it before. If you do want to see any change with the play-in tournament and with how teams are selected in terms of playoff matchups, have the 1 seed Boston Celtics lose to an 8 seed in the first round. I think that'll spark a lot of discourse on maybe we should revisit how teams match up in the postseason. But yes, I think that's the good news. We at least know what the schedule is. And I think it's look, as you mentioned, I'm glad to hear that from Chris Middleton, that this is the approach. I would have been shocked if it wasn't
right
approach. And just as we said, we don't know and likely won't know until Giannis actually steps foot on the court. The team knows, there's an idea within the building and in that locker room of, okay, we expect the big fella to return realistically around this time, but we're not going to communicate that. So it's not as though this team and the players are going to be blindsided. I don't even want to give a projection. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you either, just because of how unknown everything is. I, for one, though, am not surprised that, and again, we haven't seen the injury report yet, but just to hear the initial reports of likely doubtful for that game, we've kind of heard all along from, I hesitate to say medical professionals, but the consensus opinion has been, look, at bare minimum, this is probably a 2-week injury. So again, with those dates, I think you could kind of leap to, okay, maybe we could see him in game 2. Maybe that's a game time decision. Maybe it drags a little bit further into the series, but the approach definitely needs to be, we're not going to have Giannis. So how do we game plan to beat this Indiana Pacers team without Giannis? Again, you do have Damian Lillard and you do have Chris Middleton. And I've seen a few people point out, look, here's Damian Lillard the last time he was in the postseason. Here were his regular season numbers. Here's what he did in the playoffs. This is where Dame has really made his name the most throughout his career, with those moments. And that's what you're going to need from Damian Lillard. That is the reason why you went out and traded for him. And especially now with the potential of not having Giannis in this first round series. Another guy that is going to play a very, very big role, we think, in this series is somebody that is in line to potentially win the 6th Man of the Year. That is, of course, our friend Bobby Portis. So we do want to take a look at some of his numbers and the case for 6th Man of the Year. But more than that, tying it back to the series too, just how important is Bobby Portis going to be in this first round matchup? We will get into that conversation coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. It starts with the 2024 Nissan Rogue. It is perfect for city drives or great escapes. Has class-exclusive Google built-in your always updating assistant to call on for just about anything. So gone are the days of trying to connect your phone through that Lightning cable, because Google Assistant, Google Maps, and the Google Play Store are all built into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure. That lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder. It has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and an advanced available 4x4 capacity with 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Well, I've been told I'm a bit of a competitive person here, as that's maybe shown through on these episodes and anything else that I do. Camille, I know you're the same way as well. We are both competitive people, and that's why Monopoly Go has been really one of the perfect games to really get into. It has been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly, where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. You can charge rent when you play your friends on iconic properties, just like the classic Monopoly game. But now you can also rob their vaults of their riches for yourself. And the leaderboards will show you who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. It is not just for those with a competitive side, though, as you can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments and earn huge rewards. So get into the game and join with your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. So, Camille, Bobby Portis. A lot of this conversation started to pick up the last couple of weeks of the regular season when I think we all kind of pointed out Bobby Portis really should be getting more consideration for sixth man. He's been in the conversation the last few years. I believe he finished third in voting a season ago, but he was one of those three names. And it's the same story this year. You look at the usual suspects. Some of those guys have started to fall off one by one. And here we're left with Bobby Portis. I think the Malik Monk injury really opened the door for BP late in this season, put up some more big numbers, granted coming in from the starting lineup to close out the regular season. But just examining Bobby's numbers for the season as a whole here, 16 double-doubles off the bench. That is the most in the league. The only player close to him is Andre Drummond. Second in line is Day'Ron Sharp, and that was 10 and 6, respectively. You look one by one here, and you're not expected to post double-doubles when you're coming off the bench just because of your minutes totals. And I think that's what stands out the most for Bobby is those 16 double-doubles off the bench.
Mhm.
But just looking at some of his numbers this season, too, we kind of talked about this again, going back to Sunday's show. Giannis has clearly been the most consistent player. He has been the constant for this team all season long. You can make a pretty strong case, and I know there were some stretches where there was up and down play, mostly early in the season, but you can make a pretty strong case. Number two behind Giannis would be Bobby Portis and what he's done for the duration of this campaign.
True. And it's so if you think about what you're saying, given some of the conversations that have happened over the season, like who would have thought that I'm arguing here. Like Bobby could be considered the second most consistent player on this team. Like would not have guessed that earlier on in the year. But I mean, Bobby's play has been very important for this Bucks team, and under Doc even more so. Like you mentioned earlier, under Adrian Griffin, at times it was very up and down where it didn't seem like, okay, what are we doing exactly with Bobby here? And there were times, like especially heading to the trade deadline, where the argument was kind of like, okay, we see where Bobby's deficiencies are defensively, and the scheme that the Bucks are running right now with Adrian Griffin is not really doing him favors. Maybe we can trade Bobby to get a defensive upgrade. Like that was the conversation around the deadline. Like maybe we can find a different way to improve this team's defense because the offensive alone isn't going to be enough. Bobby, of course, he stayed here through the trade deadline, and thankfully he did. Thankfully, the Bucks did not trade Bobby Portis because, like you mentioned, he has been really, really good off the bench. And I've honestly been surprised with how little I've been hearing his name in some of the six-man conversations. Like everybody's like, it's clearly Nas Reed, or it's clearly Malik Monk, or like Bogey. And it's like, okay, these are some, like, I feel it, but like I feel like the conversation should be including what he's doing, because if you look at his numbers, he's top 5 in bench production in a few different areas. You mentioned being first in double doubles, first in total rebounds, second in total points, second in rebounds per game, third in field goal percentage, fourth in points per game off the bench. So like and he's played all 82 games. So like Bobby has been a very crucial piece for this Bucks team. And he mentioned in his presser yesterday, which made me laugh, like, I went out kind of like the president. I gave my spiel, I made my pitch, and now the voters know what I'm bringing to the table. It's on them now. Like, if I want to win it. I'm not going to say that, but like, I've done what I can do. It's on to the playoffs. If they choose to vote me, then they choose to vote me. If they don't, I move on. But he talked a lot about too how he has just even an added confidence of playing for this team with Doc Rivers as his coach. He was like, Doc put an extra battery in my back and a little bit more confidence. And I've always been a confident player. He's like, but Doc just gave me a little bit more. And it's something really comforting about going on the court and playing for a guy where, like I can be at ease on the floor and do what I'm here to do at the highest level that I can do it in. And that's going to be really important for this Bucks team heading into this matchup, especially if Giannis is missing a few games to start the series.
He played all 82 games this season, did Bobby Portis. That's the first time he's done that in his career. Second time he's played in all games. It's the first time he's played in 82 games because the year, or actually, no, I'm sorry. It's the year after that. I was going to say the 72 game season he played in 72. It was the year after that. So he missed 6 games the year the Bucks won the championship. So it's the first time Bobby's played in every single game. He has been very durable for this team, as we knock on wood, not just this season, but, since he arrived in Milwaukee, that 72 game season I referenced, he missed 6 games. The following season, he missed 10 games. The season after that, last year, he missed 12 games. This year, he has played in every single game. He's back to a very, very high percentage on 3-point shooting, 41%. Which I believe would be the second best of his career, trailing only his first year here in Milwaukee. And that's really the story, is most of his numbers, at least those counting numbers, are right up there, either the best or second or third best of his career, behind the year the Bucks won the title and the 2018-19 season, which he split between the Bulls and the Washington Wizards, when, again, he was not primarily coming off the bench. He was starting a lot of those games. So I think a big piece of this is, as we touched on some inconsistencies and some things that this team has been searching for under Doc Rivers, one of them that they're not is Bobby. And there is that connection you referenced between Bobby Portis and Doc Rivers, where it just seems like the system and everything else, Doc sees the importance and knows how to utilize Bobby Portis. I know there's some concern over what that means for potentially limiting the minutes we see Giannis playing the 5 and what that would mean for that. But I think what you would start with is, look, we got to get Giannis on the floor for that to happen first. But I think Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton, and granted, it started to dip a little bit for Pat towards the end of the season. Those are the two guys you would point to and say, okay, when Doc Rivers came in, we started to see some change with these guys. Those are two guys that are going to be very, very important for the Bucks in this postseason run. You got to stay healthy, but you're going to need to find some of that bench production. Bobby Portis, I think, is probably the biggest guy, at least for the start of this series, because for all the talk of, well, this is why you went out and you got Damian Lillard. You still have Chris Middleton. You still have Brook Lopez. You need somebody to fill Giannis' spot. And I think that's the other part where the Bucks are very fortunate to have Bobby Portis in that he plays the same position as Giannis. And just, the fact that they have stuck with him. And as you mentioned, and as Bobby mentioned, he saw those reports start to surface of his name being linked to trades, and even joked, no disrespect, I like him, but when you saw that was the name referring to Grant Williams, I thought, no, there's no way they're going to trade me for Grant Williams. And it really has been a luxury for the Bucks to have that guy behind Giannis and figure out ways to slot him in next to Giannis or next to Brook Lopez, and just finding the right balance with all three of those guys. The names that just in terms of the odds and who's the favorite, Malik Monk is still the favorite to win the 6th man of the year. You mentioned Naz Reid, who has been terrific for the Minnesota Timberwolves this season and took on an expanded role with the injury to Karl Anthony Towns late in the season. He who shall not be named of the Atlanta Hawks is up there as well. Bogdan Bogdanovic. Norm Powell seems like he is always in the mix for the 6th man of the year award. And then there's Bobby Portis. But, I'm with you. I don't think Bobby, unfortunately, is going to win this. I think this is the strongest case he has
Agreed.
ever presented, when even last year it was a much closer in terms of the odds between Malcolm Brogdon, and I believe it was Manuel Quickly. But for whatever reason, he's just buried down there. And, I think we had the conversation about Giannis quite a bit in terms of why isn't his name coming up as much in that MVP discussion. You can rationalize it a bit more that there's, whether it's Giannis fatigue, whatever it is, there's something new. There's a new shiny toy to look at. Here's what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's doing. Luka Doncic has been incredible. And again, the big thing is you've had a number of very, very deserving candidates for the MVP. What Shai did to help prop the Oklahoma City Thunder. Nikola Jokic is still arguably the best player in the league. Luka Doncic has been on an absolute tear in the second half of the season. And the Bucks record did them no favors too. So you can kind of understand that. I think you can make a case. The fact that Bobby Portis is really buried in these odds and not getting the recognition and attention we think he deserves is even more upsetting and tougher to explain than Giannis sliding down there in that MVP discussion.
It is. And the thing that I think about with that is that the general consensus around this Milwaukee Bucks team is that they underachieved this season. That's just the general consensus. This Bucks team had very high expectations set up about them to start the season. Once that Dame trade was made, people figured out how this team should look with those two superstars running the floor together, and it did not come together that way. Oh, and then you fired your coach halfway through the season. Oh, and then Doc Rivers came. Oh, and then you guys had a losing record under Doc Rivers to end this. Like, it's just, I think, to what people expected of the team. And large part for that MVP conversation, like that's a big reason with the Giannis when we were like, we get it. That's not going to happen this year. And I think it also affected Bobby in that way as well. I mean, Sixth Man of the Year is an award that I generally think of as guard focused, kind of like the guy coming off the bench, getting you the buckets. And Malik Monk is another example of that type of play. So to be honest, even though I think that Bobby has a stronger case than Naz Reid, like I was happy to see that, okay, there is a big, at least in the top two running for this award this season. But I do think that Bobby should have gotten more consideration based on the numbers alone, like what you're seeing that he did against those other two guys and even against Bogdanovich as well and Norm Powell. I think Bobby's numbers off the bench hold with him. And the value that he has to this team is very, very important. Not to say that the other ones aren't, but he's a guy who plays the same position as the team's best player. So like it's what he's expected to do when he comes into the game is a little bit different, but I don't think it's going to be his year either. But fortunately, it feels like Bobby he's like, I made my pitch, however it goes. And I'm really focused on the playoffs because this is the Bucks team where throughout the season, we've had questions about those downs and why they're happening. Like, man, they turn up against good comp. They're not great against bad comp. And now we're at the time of the year where this all matters. And hearing Bobby talk about just his mentality and how he's approaching things, like we might not get Sixth Man of the Year award for Bobby, but we should get some stellar play from him, and the Bucks are going to need that.
Yeah, and since to that point you made about, we often associate this with a guard award. Since the year 2000, we have seen, I think, just 5 non-guards win that award. The last one was Montrezl Harrell back in 2020 when the award was handed out. When the Los Angeles Clippers just had a stranglehold on the Sixth Man of the Year award. But Montrezl Harrell, the last time a non-guard won the award, Malcolm Brogdon last year, Tyler Hero the year before that, Jordan Clarkson the year before that, Lou Williams was a perennial Sixth Man of the Year guy. James Harden way back when was Sixth Man of the Year. So the forwards to win it since the turn of the century were Montrezl Harrell, Lamar Odom, Antoine Jameson back in 2004, Corliss Williamson all the way back in 2002.
Cool.
So it has been a very, very guard heavy award. And I mean, even some of those forward names, they're more in line with what you expect from Bobby Portis, to a lesser extent, Antoine Jameson. Corliss Williamson, granted, doesn't have the shooting, but probably a pretty good comp to what Bobby Portis brings out there on a nightly basis. So by way of the odds, Bobby Portis has the lowest chance of winning the Sixth Man of the Year when you look at those 5 finalists. I kind of get the sense we are going to see that guard stretch broken, and I do think Naz Reid, even though he's not the favorite by the numbers, I do think Naz Reid is going to win it. And as we said, Naz Reid has been terrific this season,
Yeah.
but Bobby Portis has been terrific for 4 seasons now with the Bucks. I mean, I know the ultimate recognition was that ring his first year here in Milwaukee, but this is kind of one of those lifetime achievement awards that you hope Bobby gets, if for no other reason than that this guy has been durable. He has done whatever you have asked of him. I remember that was the conversation we were having the moment Bobby Portis arrived. There was a lot of skeptics. Think about that, Camille. What, November of 2020, when free agency was that season, the Bucks signed Bobby Portis, and I don't know if it was universally pushed back against, but the majority were against that signing. Just thinking, how is Bobby Portis going to help this team? He's been very consistent. He has been one of clearly your 5 best players since he's arrived. As we just mentioned, he's maybe been your second most consistent and one of your more important players this season. But early in his stay here, I remember spending quite a bit of time talking about, man, the versatility that this guy has. He can play the 4, he can play the 5, he can start. He's comfortable coming off the bench. That I think for me, and that's not what goes into the award, but that more than any other reason is why I really hope Bobby gets recognized and does break through and win that award, just because of the consistency that he has brought to this group for 4 seasons now, and the journey for Bobby Portis too, that he's been willing to do whatever asked of him and has thrived in every single spot the Bucks have thrown him out there in.
And I mean, to think about this too, as we wrap this up, just think about, you mentioned Bobby signing here and how people thought of that signing in itself. I remember in real time, I was like, oh, like that's a low, like that could really hit for the Bucks. Like, it's not that big of a financial investment. Like, it's worth a chance. It's worth seeing how this pans out. And thinking about like his image at the time and how people perceive Bobby Portis and the type of player that he was, and to come here, put in the work, to grind, to not make it about him, to become so beloved by the city of Milwaukee, to the point where there are people who tune in to Bucks games and they're always like, Bobby, why do y'all love Bobby Portis so much? And he's that type of guy. He has the intensity. He shows he cares because he wears his heart on his sleeve when he plays. He can make the buckets. He can do a little bit of everything on the right nights. Like, there are some nights where you're like, hey, Bobby, like, the confidence is confidenting right now. Like, it's really high right now, but that's part of why you love him. Like, the same reasons you love him might be the reasons that annoy him from other people, but he's Milwaukee's guy at this point. And like you said, I hope he gets recognized at some point in his career for that 6th Man of the Year award, but at least he'll always be able to say, like, I'm a champion. And he did that here in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I mean, to wrap it up, not to get too cliched here, but I think the connection is Bobby Portis is Milwaukee. When Bucks fans look at him, they see themselves, right? The way he carries himself, how emotional he is, the blue collar, the grit that Bobby Portis brings. That's what instantly made that connection and made him, behind Giannis and depending on the fan, Chris Middleton, the guy that you really, really embraced. So we'll find out in the coming weeks here. But again, the numbers in terms of the betting odds, not the statistical numbers, those numbers not on Bobby Portis' side, but certainly a very, very deserving case for that 6th Man of the Year award. We mentioned the schedule being set for the Bucks and the Pacers series. We're going to get into a lot more detail and previewing this series in the next 2 days here. But just a high-level look, as we already may have mentioned one of them, the players that may be the most important for the Bucks in this series. We'll get into that conversation coming up next on Locked On Bucks. Passion, drive, and patience. That is the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. It is Locked On's NFL Mock Draft on April 17th. That is later today, 6 p.m. Central Time, 7 o'clock Eastern, streaming on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on April 17th, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, to hear who the local Locked On experts are picking for every single NFL franchise. Live reactions from local college football experts, even the fantasy football angle as well. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft on April 17th at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, streaming live on Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Camille, I mentioned one of them. I think Bobby Portis is going to play a pretty big role in this series for the Bucs. But as we mentioned, we're going to preview the series in much more detail here in the next 2 days. But just kind of as an entry into that, who's the guy or guys that you're looking at and saying this player or these guys are going to be the most important for the Bucs in this series? The X factors, not Damian Lillard, even though there's a lot of importance there. Yeah. But outside of that, the usual suspects, who stands out to you the most?
Yeah, like you said, outside of usual suspects, because I do think this is going to be a big Chris Middleton series as well, especially with Giannis being out. But someone I'm looking for to be an X factor in this series as well is going to be Patrick Beverley. Like, we've talked about the injury around Giannis and the question marks around him. There's been some question marks around Dame's health in this series going into it. I mean, after the Orlando game to end the regular season, Doc said I pulled him because he didn't look right to me. And then you hear, that Dame didn't practice yesterday. Although Dame himself said after Orlando, like, I'll be fine by game 1. Like, I'm gonna need as fine as I can be, like, at this time of the year, but like, I'll be good to play. Bobby mentioned like, I'll be good to play as well. But Pat Bev is somebody who has been moved into the starting lineup, at least that's how we saw the regular season end, with Patrick Beverley being that starting 2 guard next to Dame. But also without Giannis, we've mentioned it before, this is a Bucs team that is not flush with playmakers, right? So it's Dame, it's Chris, it's Giannis for the most part. So Patrick Beverley is going to have to also facilitate for others and help make sure that the ball is moving around, in addition to what we expect of Patrick Beverley defensively, which is another key piece, of course, of when you think Patrick Beverley, you think defense, but it's also offensively, where he's going to have to make sure that when he's involved in the play or he has the ball, that he's also able to move the ball, get others involved. And we've seen him be a pretty good facilitator for this team as well. So they're going to have to use that to their advantage. And then defensively with Pat Bev, I mean, part of the reason that the Pacers were cooking so much during the regular season is the point of attack defense was so poor. So Pat Bev is going to be a crucial piece in trying to be someone who can improve upon that, especially if you throw him out on Halliburton, how he's able to navigate around that, because we know the Pacers like to play fast. And that is not somewhere where the Bucs want to make their money in the whole series. You don't want to live in an extremely fast-paced series the whole way. We've heard Doc talk about this team's personality, right? It's physical. It's a little bit more in the mud. And Patrick Beverley is one of those guys that can get it out of the mud, so to speak. So you're going to need big play from him. And he's a guy who, as we know, he's coming in with the torn ligament in his wrist. He's had the ankle injury as well. So it's going to be very important for Pat Bev to be somebody that the Bucs can count on, given the lack of depth at point guard, given the importance of point of attack defense, given the injuries of other guys on the roster, and what his role might have to there and be while he's out there on the floor.
Yeah, that's a huge one, because I would imagine Pat Bev is going to be matched up on Tyrese Halliburton.
Yep.
And that's where the problems began for the Bucs. It wasn't just Tyrese Halliburton, but it was Tyrese Halliburton beating his man, getting into the lane, finding the open shooters, and just creating havoc for the Bucs to contend with, that they did not have the personnel to match up against. So that is going to be big. As I mentioned, we're going to preview the series in greater detail on tomorrow's show and re-examine and take a look back at those previous 5 matchups. I don't know how much to take from those, given how different both of these two teams have been since then. A different coach for the Bucs, different personnel groupings for the Pacers, with Pascal Siakam there now and some bench pieces that are gone. Bobby Portis, another one that's going to be big for what you said. And this is a team that they're going to have to be the physical team. They're going to have to be the tougher team, and the team that's wanting to play at a slower pace and use their size to their advantage. But I do also wonder, and I think we'll get into this a little bit more on tomorrow's show and subsequently Friday. Do we see the same starting five for the Bucks? Because it's two options, right? You either say, okay, we're going to really push our size, and we're going to be the ones that set the tone here. You do that, you start Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez in the front court. Or do you look at the way the Pacers we project line up in this one and say, okay, it's Miles Turner, Pascal Siakam's going to be playing their 4. He's not really a 4. I don't know what that matchup is for Bobby Portis. Do we have to play smaller to match up with those perimeter guys? And maybe that means Jay Crowder starts. So I think that's one of the big things to keep an eye on too. But again, we'll get into that conversation in these next 2 shows to round out the week. But the schedule is set. Sunday? I almost lost it. Sunday, Tuesday for the Bucks, and then 2 days off with Game 3 on Friday. Game 4 1 week from Sunday. Game 5 3 weeks out from Giannis suffering that injury will be Tuesday in Milwaukee. We will re-examine those previous 5 matchups, some key takeaways, what to expect, a little more on that conversation we just briefly touched on about how the Bucks are going to line up. Do they change the starting lineup against that Pacers team? So we'll get into that conversation coming up on tomorrow's show. Thanks to all the everydayers out there in the YouTube comments, streaming this one live. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.